You're on a cruise enjoying a holiday. You lean up against the railing, taking in the view, your eyes to the sky, a fresh cocktail in your hands. Up until now, the weather has been quite pleasant, the sea calm. But over the last few hours, dark clouds have rolled in, blotting out the sun, and the sea's kicked up to a nasty chop. Those out on deck, who have been enjoying a drink with their friends or activities with their families all day, now duck inside for shelter. Then it occurs to you in that moment, the only thing standing between you and the monstrous seas below is the metal railing of the ship you've been leaning against. Suddenly, you hear a crew member barking into their radio the words, "Oscar, Oscar, Oscar." The ship comes to a stop and starts a turn. You and the other passengers exchange confused and worried glances, and then a name begins to be repeated over the ship's loudspeaker. The situation becomes clear. A passenger has just gone overboard, and your leisurely holiday has now turned into a rescue mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and this is what happens if you fall off of a cruise ship. The idea of a passenger falling overboard from a ship might seem somewhat archaic. It was, after all, more common in the age of sailing ships, where safety regulations, ship design, and crew training were not yet as advanced as they are today. As early as the late 19th century, ships began to introduce more widespread safety measures to prevent passengers from falling overboard, and today's cruise ships come equipped even with features like man-overboard detection systems that will automatically alert the crew in the event of a passenger falling off the ship. But we'll go over those in more detail later on. Despite these advancements, accidents still do occur, with some 325 people going overboard ships or ferries between the years 2000 to 2018. Reasons for these accidents range from slippery decks to poor lighting, rough weather, and sheer human error, usually exacerbated by intoxication. But no matter what sent a passenger over the railing to begin with, once they're overboard, it becomes a race against time if they wish to have any hope of survival. Those who fall overboard at night or with no witnesses tend to have the most grim outcome, because once the ship has moved on from their position, it's unlikely they'll be spotted again, because the ship can't double back in time. Only around 17 to 25% of those who fall overboard are ever rescued, meaning that time is of the absolute essence if a passenger is to be recovered after a fall. Historically, man-overboard incidents, or MOBs as they're referred to in the maritime industry, aren't really tracked or analysed that much because they're kind of seen as something as a blip on the radar, an outlier from usual events. But one man, Ross Klein of the Memorial University of Newfoundland, has been tracking MOB data since 2000 to give us a better picture of the modern-day statistics surrounding these incidents. The data has proved invaluable to demonstrate an important aspect of safety at sea that's generally ignored. But the fact that these records only go back as far as the year 2000 underlines how little of that data has been publicly known throughout history. While Klein's records have given us a much greater understanding of the frequency of MOBs since the new millennium, there's still much to be learned from these occurrences. It might be tempting to believe that the slim odds of survival and falling overboard on a modern cruise ship would mean that man-overboard incidents in the age of the ocean liner must have been essentially a death warrant. But stories exist of passengers taking a spill from the decks of ocean liners back in the day and living to tell the tale. On November 4th, 1907, a trimmer intentionally jumped overboard from the German liner SS Bremen. An alarm was immediately sounded because somebody saw him, and the ship was turned around back toward the trimmer's position. A lifeboat was lowered quickly with an officer and 4 sailors aboard to ferry him back to safety. Having clearly changed his mind about his intentions, the trimmer was quickly spotted swimming strongly enough to keep up with the rough seas, and within half an hour he was safely back on board his ship. 6 years earlier, in March 1901, a crew member of the SS Austral lost his footing during a boat drill and slipped overboard into the sea. A keen sailor's instinct kicked in, and he promptly swam away from the ship as he hit the water to avoid being sucked in toward the propeller. A lifebuoy was thrown from the ship and drifted some 2 miles before he was able to take hold of it, and a manned lifeboat wasn't far behind to pull him to safety. The entire sequence of events, from the sailor's fall to his eventual rescue and the Austral being underway once again, took no longer than 20 minutes, a further testament to the quick thinking and efficiency of ships' crew members back in the day. Now, not every historical incident had such a happy ending, and in fact some pretty serious mysteries surround a few of these. One of the most interesting is that of Mr. Rudolf Diesel, known for the invention of his famous engine. He boarded the steamship Dresden on September 29, 1913 for a quick overnight voyage from Belgium to England. At the end of the night, around 10 p.m, he retired to his cabin, but the next morning he was nowhere to be found. His bed had not been slept in, his nightclothes were still laid out neatly. But sometime in the night, Diesel had stepped out of his cabin, never to return. Days later, his body was found floating by a pilot boat, but the events surrounding his death sparked endless speculation. Some claimed that it was an accident, some claimed that it wasn't. Conspiracy theories assert that his death had actually been a homicide perpetrated by the German government, who weren't too happy that the German-born inventor was on his way to show off his handiwork to the British Admiralty. The theories and speculation run rampant to this day, but it's safe to say we'll likely never know the truth regarding the demise of the famous inventor on board the Dresden. But how did older ships actually try to prevent man-overboard situations? Well, in the case of early great ocean liners like Olympic, lookouts remained at their posts around the clock, especially in the stern section, where typically a quartermaster kept a close watch for anyone going overboard from the ship's docking bridge. If someone went overboard, they could verbally raise the alarm, and once the rest of the crew were alerted to the fact that a passenger had gone overboard, the ship would reverse course and make its way back to the victim's last known position at reduced speed. Life rings were kept around the ship's railing so they could be thrown after the person who'd gone in. It would help them keep afloat, and they would also make it easier to see them. The ship's two emergency cutters, which were kept swung out permanently with a lamp burning each night, would be manned by a few crew members and lowered to the sea in an attempt to search for the poor victim. Now, later ships like Aquitania and the Queen Mary actually employed more advanced motor launchers for this purpose. They actually had their own engines and they could go searching out into the ocean. Lifebuoys were also kept close at hand should the victim be spotted in the water close enough to the ship to be within some reach. Other ships like Lusitania made use of a really clever device called the night lifebuoy, which actually floated and ignited flares on contact with the water so it could easily be seen in the dark. But despite all of this, the odds of actually surviving a man overboard situation were dreadfully slim. Once word of the incident reached the bridge, the first order of business was to stop the engines and initiate a turn, which was in itself a complex and very time-consuming process. A ship the size of Queen Mary, for instance, travelling at speed would take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to stop and fully execute the turn, and in this time the ship would have travelled considerably far away from the victim. At a speed of 24 knots, for example, the ship will have travelled a half mile per minute, meaning that by the time the ship was even on its way back, they'd already steamed as much as 5 nautical miles away. Once the ship reached the victim's last known position, spotting them was the next hurdle, because with the chop of the water and the foamy whitecaps, it made it nigh impossible to actually see the victim, who could only be visible from the neck up. Compared to the massive scale of a ship, a lone human bobbing in the water looks like little more than a tiny speck. Sound, unfortunately, doesn't travel very far in the open ocean, so the victim's shouts could likely go unheard. If not immediately rescued, a person who's gone overboard faces a very grim and certain fate. Exposure to freezing water temperatures means that hypothermia is one of the most immediate risks, but if exposure is not the concern, then the unfortunate march of time will be. Without any extra flotation, most humans can only tread water for around 2 or 3 hours, meaning that once you hit the water, the clock has already started ticking. It's a bleak fate, and one that's unfortunately not unlikely, as on modern cruise ships, 1 or 2 people come face to face with this nightmare scenario almost every month. Now, this is despite all of our advancements in safety regulations, high-tech equipment, and more efficient protocols. And one of these really clever devices used nowadays is a kind of automatic detection system. It uses thermal imaging cameras and small radars along the hull to detect a large signature over the side. Now, this automatically raises an alarm on the bridge. The systems are mounted along the hull in stations, and the biggest cruise ships can have as many as 12 or so. The system itself can cost around $250,000, so it's no small investment. The issue is, though, that the system creates a prevalence for false alarms. Large seabirds, for example, could trigger the alarm. The truth is there's no surefire way to guarantee someone who falls overboard will ever be seen in the first place. Between 2009 and 2019, only 48 people out of the 212 who fell overboard were ever saved from the water. The cruise industry as a whole seems quite content to sweep those statistics under the rug, oftentimes citing drunkenness or irresponsible behaviour as the reasons why a passenger might fall overboard. The theory, or the mentality, seems to be that if every passenger is behaving responsibly, it should be near impossible to fall off the ship at all. But when the cruise industry relies so heavily on the profits earned from alcohol purchases on board and the sale of drink packages, a different problem emerges. Promoting responsible behaviour suddenly becomes something of financial liability, one that most cruise lines are kind of hesitant to take. The consequences of this can actually be disastrous, as it was in 2016 when Samantha Broberg boarded the Carnival Liberty for a vacation with her 2 close friends. By 2 a.m. that same night, she'd been served some 19 drinks and found herself sitting atop the ship's railing with her back to the ocean. Whether it was caused by the roll of the ship or her own inebriated state, just a few moments later, Samantha lost her balance and fell backwards into the sea. Her friends, who were asleep at the time, were none the wiser until the next morning when her disappearance was finally reported to the crew. By 5 p.m, the Coast Guard was brought in to search for Samantha, but by then it was far, far too late. Surveillance footage later gave Samantha's family the answers they sought, but not the answers they'd been hoping for. Cruise lines also like to assert that some of the man overboard situations are intentional, and while this may very well be the case for some, the dead, as we all know, tell no tales. And for many of those who met this tragic fate will never know the truth surrounding their demise. In May of 2024, a man was reported to have gone overboard the Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas, the world's newest and largest cruise ships. Details were scarce, with passengers even being informed by the ship's captain that the man in question had been found safe, an announcement which was met with cheers and applause throughout the ship. But later, word began to spread that the man had indeed been found, but he had not survived the ordeal. While confusing, for the most part this turn of events was largely shrugged off. A passenger on board described the lukewarm reaction to the news from his fellow travellers by saying it just seemed like more people would have been like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" But no. People were just going about their day. It's kind of dystopian. Sometimes the impossible can happen though. In around 2022, James Michael Grimes fell overboard from a cruise ship and survived 20 hours treading water in the ocean. And he was found alive and well. When stepping aboard a ship of any kind, a passenger is assuming a level of responsibility for their own behaviour, and they should acknowledge their role in their own safety. It seems for the most part that your average ship's passenger understands this, and that's why instances of people falling overboard remain relatively rare. But as we've seen, both historically and in the modern era, these incidents are still not unheard of. So what can really be done to stop it? Well, short of enclosing passengers entirely indoors, it seems there will always be incidents of people falling or even jumping overboard, be it under the influence or otherwise. These incidents are just rare enough that cruise lines see them as little more than a blip on the radar, so the bulk of the responsibility falls with the passenger to be aware of their surroundings and keep a close eye on their friends, family, and fellow travellers. So next time you're on a cruise or a transatlantic crossing, whatever you do, please don't climb any railings or sit on top of them, because you might accidentally make a splash. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.